Okay. So hi, I'm Curtis Suttle. I hang out over here in the Biodiversity Research Center. This is what our group looks like. So we're about, runs usually between about 10 and 15 people, students, postdocs, other researchers. And so what we do is we look at viruses primarily, so viruses in the oceans. And so we're really interested in what kind of viruses are there. We're interested in their diversity, their deep evolution. And we're really interested in their role in the oceans. And that's why it's kind of really fun to be integrated here with the Institute of Oceans and Fisheries. There. So if you take a drop of seawater, you look at it, this is kind of what it looks like. And each of these little dots that you see here are actually virus particles. And so what we know is that on average, there's about 10 million viruses per milliliter of seawater. And if you went back a little while, a couple decades ago, people used to write papers why there were no viruses in seawater. And so this turned out to be a really interesting question. If you sort of think of that compared to stars in the universe, there's roughly about 3 times 10 to the 23 stars in the universe. If you compare that to viruses in the ocean, I'm having some trouble with this. You have to go closer. Nope, it's not advancing at all. Is there a manual way to advance?
Use the arrow just so you're back.
It's a map.
I can do it for you.
Oh, there we go. So if we look at in the oceans itself, that there's about 10 to the 30th viruses in the ocean. And so if you stretch those viruses end to end, it's amazing they'll go 10 to the 7th light years, or they would stretch further than the nearest 60 galaxies. And so I think that's a really interesting number, because it turns out there's about Avogadro's number of infections per second in the ocean. And so viruses, in fact, are... Oh, I lost my top computer. Next slide, if you could. Next thing. So point, there's lots and lots of viruses in the sea. And so why does anybody care? So if we think about the oceans, and we're all interested in the oceans here, if you take all the living material in the oceans, and I know in this group we span everything from people that work on cetaceans to microbes, but if you take and you weight everything by weight, about 95 to 98% of the living material in the oceans by weight is microbial, right? So you can't see it. And 90% of the genetic material in the ocean, the actual individual genomes, are actually encompassed in viruses. And this represents by far most of the genetic diversity, and hence biological diversity in the ocean is actually tied up in viruses. People care because these microbes produce about half the oxygen in the earth, and what's really remarkable is what we've discovered is that viruses kill about 20% of the biomass in the ocean every day. So in fact, the viruses keep the wheels of the ocean spinning really, really quickly. So if you're interested in climate change, if you're interested in nutrient and energy cycling, if you're interested in any of the aspects, you really have to understand what those microbial systems are doing. So this is kind of the way we look at the Earth then, right? So we look at it from a very Eurocentric perspective, and we're really interested in not only what viruses are there. It turns out many of them are new life forms. They have all kinds of interesting perspectives. So sometimes we work with NASA, astrobiology, about how do you discover new forms of life. But it turns out that viruses, I give a lot of talks about how viruses are our friends as opposed to our enemies, because in fact, viruses, if you take the viruses out of the seawater, primary productivity stops, for example. So we've been really surprised by that, because it turns out viruses are one of the major regenerators of nutrient and energy in the ocean. So they're absolutely critical to the global geochemical cycles. So we're interested in that, and we're also interested in the aspect in terms of disease, interactions with organisms, interactions with fish, shellfish. So we look at the disease perspective as well, but we're very, very much interested in terms of what they are and what they're doing. I think that's it. So thank you very much.